appropriate that we have a Blight Summit on Earth Day, I think, because we are all focused on remediating blight and building healthier communities and greening our region and helping people recognize the importance of taking care of the place where they live and call home. And so I'm really delighted. I'm Donna Holdorf-Roadman. I am on the board of the Land Bank and Redevelopment Authority. And I am the moderator today, so if you see me get hysterical, it's because I'm really picky about time. Christy will vouch for me. I don't want to spend too much time introducing our folks that are here for the first panel. You have their bios in your program, so I think that you'll be able to catch up on who they are and what they do. Let's just talk for a minute about this first session and why it's important and why we wanted everyone to be in the room and not run this as a concurrent session. There's a lot of need in the region, across the Commonwealth, across the United States, to find a way to control blight. It happens everywhere. We see a lot of it just because we had major industries that closed, went away, and left behind an economy that was struggling to find its way again. And you can see that in our towns. One of the things that we also see is that residents, even though you are looking at blight in your neighborhood, don't like it. They want to see it changed. They want to be able to help. And that's what this session is going to be about. You know, a long time ago someone said it takes a village. Well, it's going to take all of us working together in a coordinated manner to find the partnerships that we need and the people that can help us get from A to B. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, about how you look for those partners, how you create a community that is vested and invested in their own neighborhoods, right? We all could fix up everything and then walk away. As elected officials, you're not the elected officials forever, so you can't be the doer. You need to be the facilitator. You need to be the person who helps people find their way and helps people be committed to, I want my place where I live to be a better place for myself and for my children. So that's my 2 cents worth, although sometimes I can't keep my mouth shut, so I promised Christy and Eric I would really try. But it's my pleasure to introduce Christy Rowing and Eric Chandler, 2 people that I have worked with in the past, some for short time, some for longer. And I think that you'll find that the work that they've done will help inform. And when they're done talking, we're going to open the floor. And we want to have conversations. This is not about us talking to you. This is about us talking together, which is how we will arrive at methods and solutions to control and remediate blight. The goal, of course, the lofty dream is that we get rid of blight completely, but we don't live in Disney World, so we can't have that. We can sure try. So without further ado, I don't know who's going first, but I'm going to start. Okay.
If I would have started cussing, Steph would have Hi everyone, I'm Christy Rowing. I'm assuming my mic is now working. No. How about now? Better. Goodness, if you would have told my kids that a room couldn't hear me, they would have completely denied that at all levels. So I want to start out by saying, and I'll reference my children again, I really hope that this is a conversation. No one wants to listen to me in lecture mode. I promise you it's not pretty. And I have a little bit of stage fright, so I do much better with questions than I do in lecture mode. Thrilled to be here, thrilled to be sitting here with my longtime colleague and partner, Eric took office in Canonsburg right about the same time I was coming on as the executive director of the citywide CDC, and that was in 2016. 5.5 years later, if you would have told me that I would then become the quote-unquote expert on blight, I would have laughed. And I'm still laughing a little bit now. And the only reason I say that is I had no full understanding of how prevalent and how personal blight is for our communities. And when I say personal, I mean deeply personal for your communities. Blight is something that weighs on the kids in your community, your school district, your tax assessors, your local government officials, your visitors, and the grandparents that have watched some of these communities go from a thriving small town to some place that they don't recognize anymore. And I think it's really important for us, especially the people in this room, to remember that it is truly a personal issue. And the partnerships that we form, and there should be lots of partnerships across lots of different organizations and for-profit, governmental, and community-based organizations. I think if we all go back to the idea that these are somebody's homes, these are somebody's businesses, somebody built what we need to either remediate or tear down. I think that lens is truly important for us as we continue this conversation. So I'm going to let Eric introduce himself, and then we'll go from there. Do I hand this? Oh,
no, I got one.
All right.
Everybody can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Good. First of all, give yourselves a round of applause for you being here. Give yourselves a hand. And the reason why I say that is because I truly believe we all share the same passion of our communities and eliminating blight, reducing blight. And I'm excited to be here. As Christy said, I'm the borough president of Canonsburg Borough Council president. That's what I'm currently am. I'm in my second term. And when I first ran and won, I reached out to Christy just to find out what they were doing in Washington. And from that point in time, she became a great partner, a great reference. And then some of the circles that we're in, it seems like we run into each other all the time. Same thing with Donna, we run into each other all the time. I'll share, blight for me is very personal. When I first came on council, the first thing I did was I drove around my town. I grew up in Canonsburg, so I drove around and was just like, man, there's got to be something better. We've got to be better. We've got to do something to clean this place up. Why can't this be a tourist destination? Why can't people come to Canonsburg and want to hang out in Canonsburg and spend their money in Canonsburg and be a place that they visit? Like, we always think about Florida. We always think about some place like that, right? Although I do like Fort Lauderdale in the Keys, so I'm not complaining there. But why can't it? Why can't Westmoreland County? Why can't Washington County? Why can't our region be a destination, a tourist destination for people to come? So I'm excited to actually learn from you as well as connect and network because I don't know it all, and I know if I have a question, I know who I can call. And if she doesn't have the answer, she can point me in the direction and connect with that person. So that's what this was really about. It's really about a partnership, the ability to connect with people, and let's get better together.
So, Donna asked us to talk about things that we've accomplished in our local communities. And I think the thing that I'm most proud of in the city of Washington, and at this point a little bit beyond, as you know, the CDC in Washington is affiliated with the Pittsburgh Community Reinvestment Group. They provide all of our technical support, our advocacy support, and our legislative support. And then we have the Local Government Academy, who I know Joy is here somewhere. I saw her come in. These are resources that the CDC in Washington could not be sitting here in this quote-unquote panelist position without organizations like this. It's so important define and build the alliances that give you sort of the back room and the technical support to get the work done. So I'll try to be really brief and talk a little bit about our beginning steps, and then I'd love to hear, and I think Eric would agree, we'd love to hear what you all are working on and what questions, and brainstorm solutions, because I think that the solutions are in this room, and that's something we should all really look to share with each other. So in 2016, I landed in the city of Washington, really with no background. I am in the South Hills of Pittsburgh, familiar with Washington mostly from my husband, who grew up in the Panhandle of West Virginia, and told me about the Main Street that was a huge destination for them coming out of the Northern Panhandle. And unfortunately, by the time that I was familiar with the Washington area, it was mostly Canonsburg, the outlets, and the cloverleaf to get me to WVU. And I won't tell you in what year I was making that drive to WVU as a college student. But my point being is, since then, you have seen a boom and bust cycle that is not unique to Washington, is really not that unique to Pennsylvania in terms of the physical housing and economic building stock that is our Main Street. So the most important thing we did, and this is laughable, and Joy can attest to this, we began an inventory process, GIS-based, which I'm sure everyone in this room is more familiar with than I am. But I landed in Washington and someone said, oh, do an inventory. Okay, what exactly will that look like? And so in my naivete, and I can't tell you the number of hours with a help desk out of an organization in Loveland, Colorado, which has now been rebranded as Regrid, and I'm talking hours of help desk help from them. I set the National Honor Society kids from the Washington schools to what is considered our most challenging ward, the 8th ward in Washington. 32 kids, Easter weekend, with the help of public safety and lots of other adult teacher volunteers. They went about in 2 days, and I'm gonna say 60 pizzas worth of time, went through and inventoried 1,000 parcels. 1,000 parcels with kids who had no idea why they were doing it or how important it was. Although, for many of our students, this was their neighborhood. This is where they lived. They did an amazing job, and that became our basis for our heat map. Heat map? That sounds important. Why is it important? For your funding. That map grew legs. So I have the map of the 8th ward, again, the most challenging ward in the city of Washington, that was completed by kids who were much smarter than I was, run through PCRG's support team, as well as now Regrid support team. And I had a heat map to track what properties were in distress, what properties had sort of crossed over to what we would consider, unfortunately we classified that in color brown, which probably wasn't my best move, but I wasn't that smart to figure it out at the end. Maybe green would have been a little bit more friendly. That was what generated in the coming years our funding and our advocacy work for the city of Washington. We were able to tell people exactly how many properties were blighted, how many properties needed demolition, and how many properties we could then track through our home rehab program. Our home rehab program started very humbly with a partnership from Rebuilding Together. The first year, we did 2 major projects, and then we did, I think, 7 or 8 sort of smaller clearing type projects, which was just sort of cleaning up the lots, pruning trees back, doing those types of things. And why do I tell you all of that in a really long Southern/Italian way? Is you have to start somewhere. It doesn't matter where, I promise you, it does not matter where, but you have to have something concrete to talk about. In the subsequent years, with the exclusion of COVID, we continue to grow that home rehab project. And where did we get people? Where did we get money? From anywhere we could. The next year, the Rotarians did my GIS survey for the 7th Ward. So I went from 15 and 16-year-olds feeding them pizza to, let's just say, generously 60 and over people doing GIS work on their mobile phones or an iPad. They were a lot of fun, and they moved a little bit slower, but their detail was much better than my high school students. And to this day, I still have a strong fondness for them. We've also done blight inventories with W&J students, and pretty much if you show up at my office on a nice day, I'm going to send you out somewhere to do an inventory. So if anyone's interested, we'll be doing that again this summer with the help of the local government academies, interns, and everybody else who will show up. So, people doing inventory, people in those neighborhoods doing their own inventories, really key. And then we wanted to ask for money. So, foundations, DCED are sort of the initial sort of go-to. But you know who else was really good financial partners? We had financial institutions, a couple of banks that said, we want to be a part of the solution. Because guess what? Why do banks want to see blight go away? Anyone? Bankers? Anyone?
Healthy communities helping for healthy banks.
Tell us more about the healthy banks part.
Profitable banks with loans and deposits.
Perfect, thank you. Guess who else wanted to help? Our healthcare systems. Why do our healthcare systems want to help? I'm sorry?
Improve everybody's health.
Improve everybody's health. How about on a little bit more of a micro level?
Asbestos.
I'm sorry?
Asbestos and lead.
Okay. Another answer, which wasn't apparent to me. How about their own workforce? Guess what? Not everybody's a doctor in a healthcare system. Not everybody's an administrator in a healthcare system. In order for the Washington health system to work, to retain everybody sort of not in the C-suite or not with an MD behind their name, those people want to live in the community where their healthcare position is. Let me say that again. Your workforce wants to live in the communities where they work. That also means the county employee system, the college education system. I think teachers, and I'll turn to Ashley, I don't want to speak too much for the teachers because I think this is a mixed bag. I think the teachers and the educators sometimes want to live in the communities where they teach, but not all the time, especially you're like my poor person who lives next door to me that also had my son for math. That wasn't really a good thing. Anyways, those organizations, those companies, those community assets have a very vested interest in the quality of your housing stock and your neighborhood. Funny though, sometimes they don't know it. It's our job to tell them how important the quality of their housing stock is. So, wrapping this up, I promise that I went down sort of the lecture mode and I didn't mean to, but it comes by naturally. Here's the thing, inventory, partnerships, funding. 3 cornerstones of how you look at blight in your communities and how you solve for X. And the one other thing I want to say is I have had sort of a little bit of a 180. When I started this job, I thought everything should be torn down, right? If it's ugly, tear it down. Guess what? That's not going to work. And why is it not going to work, especially in 2022? Anyone want to guess? Tax revenue? What else?
Unemployment.
Thank you. Why else? Anybody? I'm sorry?
We need more housing.
We need more housing. Ding, 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 ding. And guess what? Anyone know what the square footage of new construction cost is? I heard ridiculous, and that is accurate. That is the most accurate, actually. So here's what I challenge you all to do, is to look for partners across your community spectrum and figure out, even though, again, I probably would have torn down more 5 years ago than I'm willing to today, figure out how to sort of solve some of these a little further gone in terms of the housing stock that you have now, because guess what? Not only is it going to cost you a fortune, you can't get the stuff. Like, legitimately, you can't get the materials. Okay, so I am going to cut myself off, just like, last call, and turn it over to Eric. But I'd love to come back and to have more points of conversation.
So I'll give you, thank you. I've learned some good nuggets. I don't know about you, that I'm going to take back. So our story in Canonsburg is a little bit different. Like I mentioned before, is when I first got on council, it was really just for me personally, it was a personal thing. So I drove around and just started creating my own list. And what I was looking for, and my father taught me this long ago, he says, most of the houses, if they don't have a gas meter, then you know that no one's in that house at all. So I just started looking for those type of houses, or houses with high grass or trash or things like that. And I created the list, but it wasn't 1,000 extensive, it wasn't that extensive. But it was a big list, and then I turned it over to our code enforcement officer, and through that process began to work with him in terms of, hey, I need you to research these properties. Because quite frankly, I didn't have the time to do that. So code enforcement began to research the properties, and come to find out some properties were condemned, some properties were vacant, really didn't know the vast where these properties were. And then every month we would just take a property at a time to figure out where it's at in the process. And then fast forward, that was 2018, 2019, we worked with the Washington County Redevelopment Land Bank, Rob Phillips there. We worked with him, signed up with the land bank, and through their office, we were able to purchase 2 of those properties that were on the list. One property we actually had to tear down because it was inhabitable. It was condemned, it was falling apart. And it's one of those where it would have cost more money to rehab the house than actually to tear it down. And then one house, and the second house that they purchased, we actually were able to sell it to an adjacent property owner who currently rehabbed the house and now has it's a rental property for him. So now that piece of property is back on the tax rolls. And then fast forward 2020. And shout out again to Joy Ruff of Local Government Academy. She reached out and said that they were doing a blight mitigation initiative. So we worked with a consultant that actually, we gave him the list that we were working with. We also drove around so he can get a snapshot of what we were dealing with. And from there, he was able to do all the data research, so we have the data as to where majority of our blight is. And Canonsburg's broken into 3 districts, and it was District 3 which has the most blight. And then we're continuing to work off of his report, the list, if you will. and fast forward to today, right now, we have more vacant properties. So we started adding, so we have our blight list, we have a vacant property list, and the vacant property list are where someone has died, someone has foreclosed on the property. So we also look at tax delinquent properties as well. And we're still working with our code enforcement, a fire inspector, building inspector, tax collector. So we're working with all those different organizations to continue to fight this blight process. But we have a list, and Christy mentioned that the first place to start is really, where can you start? Is speak with your code enforcement officer. For those that are in the room, probably know those properties. Start there. If not, start on a street. Just start on a street. And I like what Christy said about having the community, having the people that live on the street actually take inventory of their street. Because we have a couple of those people that really care about their street. Yeah, that's kind of how our process is. And today, we continue to use the list. We continue to work cross-functionally with these different departments. And now what's been really cool is we've had investors come in. We've had certain guys that actually, that's what they do. They remodel homes. So we've worked with them in terms of purchasing, rehabbing them, and putting them back on the tax rolls or selling those properties. I'll give you one example. It was a house that one of our rehab flippers, I'll call him, turned the house, he spent probably $100,000 to rehab the house. He sold it for $400,000 house. It's a beautiful home, but he had the ability to do that. So right now, I'm going to open it up for questions, whatever questions. Yes, sir.
Yes, I'm Mike O'Bardo from Unity Township. And my question is, in your communities, have you used any tax incentives, such as tax abatements, to try to curb blight in your communities? And if you did, how did you work with the county and also the school districts?
Because for Canonsburg, we have not done that yet. We're not at that place yet to do that. But that's actually a great idea to use some tax abatement, and I'll defer to Christy on that.
So we have had, I think, probably right around 21 properties take advantage of those types of situations. And I'll be honest, and I'll go back to the people. The director of school finance sits on the CDC board. So he is in the meetings as we discuss this. So he is my advocate for the school district. We have a great partnership with the county. As Eric mentioned, Rob Phillips, and now Bob Griffin, who is our local connection there. And then the city of Washington has had one mayor since I've come on board, and that council has been very accommodating. They understand that a few years of lost taxes in the end will pay off in the future. And here's the other thing that I didn't understand, and I'm sure lots of people in this room know this, but I did not. So for the novices in the room, I will say this. So when your local government sends on your tax bill to, I'm not going to use their name, but we have a service that collects that. We don't get the face value of that back. So you've sent a property on to be collected by X, lawyer, firm, whoever. The company Washington uses is based out of Philadelphia, so again, I just refrain from using their name. You only get between 30 and 40% of the face value back on that. So think about it. You think, oh, I'm going to lose all this money. And again, if you don't know that you're not getting all of that money back anyways, it changes your math and your decision making just a little bit more. And I have a great relationship with my local government, but I will tell you that many of them did not realize that they are not getting the full face value back once it has gone on to a collection firm. So that was something I learned.
Christy, just for clarifications, You're not talking about when we pay our taxes, if we have them, you know, we send them to a certain company that collects them. You're talking
Yeah.
about people who are
Seriously delinquent, before they end up on the county's list, there is sort of this purgatory of a couple of years that they, well, I'll just speak for the city of Washington, they get referred out to a separate third party for collection of past due taxes. Not, you should pay your taxes. Let me be very clear, pay your taxes. But if it's so far gone, or it's, in the case of some family-held homes after someone has passed, I would seriously do a deeper dive into the loss of revenue if you use a third-party provider.
So I'm sure there's more questions. I just wanted to do a couple of things. How many people in the room, raise your hands, are developers looking to rehab? Thank you. Thanks for coming. And I know you're speakers, so how many, we have some realtors here? I thought we had some realtors registered. Okay. And how about people who are potential flippers? Anybody? Okay. So I think one of the things that Christy and Eric both brought up is that one thing I wanted to talk about is engaging with youth. The fact that you used your scholarship kids to do that first inventory, no matter how much information you got, these are kids that are the future owners of your community. And that's the way you get them to be invested. That's how they start to take ownership. Not the normal partners. Banks, healthcare associations. There are people in this room I'm going to call out Habitat. Where's my friends from Habitat? They're at their table. They're looking for houses to flip. They're looking for houses to rehab. So you've got to look outside your general, you know, who's it going to be. The other thing is, learn how the land bank and the redevelopment authority can really be your partners, no matter if it's in Westmoreland or it's in Washington, or we have folks from Altoona today and from Erie. There are lots of things that you might not know that they do. They have access and information on how to get grants that you might not even know about, because they hear from HUD and EPA and all of those stuff. And that's where a lot of the money might come, and you might need that specific partner, a nonprofit or a municipal partner who can bring money into your project that you wouldn't otherwise have access to. So, questions, more questions? Yes, sir.
Has your organization used conservatorship for problem properties where possibility there's been an individual that owned it, walked away from it, says, I want nothing to do with it, so it's falling apart? And what was the process that you went through? I know in my town, we went through a conservatorship. We gave our solicitor, we said, get it done. And then we went through the courts and got a conservatorship of a mansion that was falling apart. And then there's a person that was interested, and she bought it, and it's a $2 million job or project. So conservatorship is a good thing. I don't know if a lot of towns use that. It costs money up front legally. You go before the judge and they appoint a conservator. And then that way you get things done. It just doesn't sit there. So I was wondering if you guys use that.
We have not, but we are getting ready to. We have a couple of projects, and the CDC actually owns adjacent to some more parcels that either need to be remediated or torn down. We have not done it yet, but that is on our list for this year. We're ready to go to that next step.
Same thing for us. We have not used it. We're aware of it. We really work with the land bank, and it seems like, I'm not sure what their process completely is, but through the land bank, he was able to acquire some of the properties or get those properties versus having to avoid that conservatorship, because I know that can be from what I'm told, that can be very expensive.
It really up front, you pay your solicitor to go through the steps to go to the courts,
and then you go before the judge, present your case, and then he rules on it. After the conservator is appointed, there really isn't any cost to the borough, because the conservator now acts like the owner, and he can make a decision, or the law firm, that's who was assigned as the conservator. Then the borough, then we saw action. They went out and they sought developers, or they made the legal decisions. It was like, say, they took a quasi-ownership. So it worked out fine. Speaking also, we've used the land bank too for problem properties. We just had about $80,000 demo, and it was in our CDBG funding. We were going to tear it down, but the land bank came in and did an excellent job. So there's a lot of sources, a lot of ways to get around it, but a lot of boroughs are small. They don't have a lot of money. That was the way that we were thinking. But then I kept saying, hey, if you're going to do something, it takes money to do things, but you'll get results. So the conservatorship is a good way if you have a problem property with like no ownership. Somebody just walks away because the borough just can't go in and say, hey, we're going to do this. So that's the legal process. So it was a good thing. There was a course called Blight to Bright, and the local government academy offered that.
Yeah.
And I got it for free because I went to a seminar, and someone that won it said, well, you need it more than me. And they gave this course that was like a $400 and some value, and I took it. And the conservatorship was part of the program. And it was a very good program. And I brought that up to my counsel and our solicitor, and that's how we proceeded on this big property.
And I think you bring up, you bring up a great point, right? We all talk about local government, right? It's the local government that has to buy in, right? So for those that are in local government, elected officials, it's really up to us, right, to talk with our fellow council members of the seriousness of blight, because I didn't have the issue, or I don't have that issue of members not wanting to make our town better. But that's the reason why I ran, because previous councils were like that. They didn't care what was happening in town. We had blighted buildings on our main street. They didn't care. They just were bitter at each other. So it's important. So if you're an elected official right now, my encouragement to you is you be that voice, you be that forerunner, you be that trailblazer that's going to say, hey man, we have to do something about this issue, because there are resources out there. And not to put her on blast, but Joy Ruff. Joy, can you stand, please?
Yeah, Joy, I was going to ask if you wanted to do it.
Could you? I don't want to put her on the spot, but Joy Ruff from Local Government Academy she's done a tremendous job with the organization, and it's a great resource not only for newly elected officials, but for other things, whether it's blight, whether it's webinars or whatever. So people are going to come see you later.
We will make sure that this information on how to contact Joy will be in a follow-up email to all of you via Eventbrite. So you'll have her contact information to be able to understand the plethora of opportunities she offers for training and education and assistance. I saw a question over here.
Yeah, I know most of the conversation's been around residential properties. I was wondering if you could elaborate on more business-type properties, commercial properties that are kind of in the heart of our communities, the main street of our communities. I know Canonsburg has a facade program.
Yeah, actually, yes. So we actually we hired a person almost like Christy to head up. She's our economic development director. So we hired her for specifically that reason, to help us with our main street. And what she really did is, again, we created the list, we cataloged what those were, the square footage, who the owners were they willing to sell those properties, what they were asking for, and then we worked with some other developers to come in and purchase some of those, and then it was just more of an awareness of what those properties were. And then her name's Lisa, and Lisa still works with now she's working with what businesses are going to come in. So it's now, they're buying the buildings, rehabbing the buildings, and the goal is really retail on the bottom, residential at the top. But it's working with those that are purchasing those buildings. And council actually has an opportunity to sit down with them and say, hey, what are you going to do with this building? And yeah, maybe, we can't say, no, you can't do that, but it's more of, hey, here's what we're thinking about for our downtown. Here's kind of the goal where we're going. And it's been amazing to work with those people, but that's really how we've done it.
Representative Nelson.
Yeah, just a question on the approach. Developers running into roadblocks because of the zoning upgrade, like the retail on the bottom, residential on the top is great, but the electrical upgrades within some of those buildings, how did you approach like the code differences and the electrical upgrades to get a dual use type of status actually implemented?
It's really, we've updated our ordinance 2021, our zoning ordinance, we updated our zoning ordinance 2021. But the first thing we do is actually sit down with that, the person that's interested actually in buying that property as to what you want to do and understand. And we actually list out, here's kind of what it's going to look like if you purchase this property, if you're going to do retail on the bottom, residential on top. Here's what it's going to look like. We've had most of the investors were like, we realize that, and because they're older buildings, we realize that, and they're willing to put the money to do that. We've also instituted to help with that is, he mentioned a facade program, so we'll do that piece of it, and they realize, okay, I can get upgrade the facade, and I'm willing to put the money in to do the upgrade, the electrical, things like that. So we've had 2 developers walk away from it because it was just too expensive for them. But we sit in the front, before even they're interested in the property, we actually sit down with our code and zoning and building official and say, here's what you have to do to rehab. So it's really up to you. So before they purchase that property, we make sure they have that information.
And I can't stress enough how many code enforcement people are in the room.
Yeah, give yourselves a hand. Give yourselves a hand.
So, you all are the gatekeepers. You and the person who answered the phones at City Hall are the gatekeepers for the development and the improvements that happen. Washington has had a bit of a, I'll just call it a merry-go-round, where we seem to be doing it one way, 1 year, and then we jump to a different firm the next year, and so on and so forth. Not the best tactic, I will admit. But here's what I will tell you. You want to be a problem solver, not a problem stopper. So somebody comes to you and says, I'm going to invest, I'm going to do this. And you say, you can't do X or you can't do Y. Sometimes they don't get any further than that. They may not know who Eric is, they may not feel comfortable, but you guys are the people that control sort of the ebb and flow of information. And I just strongly encourage you to look at those conversations as you're the real estate director for the city, especially if they're not really familiar with the area. And then the other thing that I'm in the process of exploring right now, in fact, Chris and I have a call later this afternoon, is when I first came to Washington, we did not have what I would consider market-ready retail space on our main street. So it's 14 blocks, downtown Washington, no market-ready rate. We used a similar facade program, partnered with some foundation money, then partnered with the local share account. In 4 years, we've put over $1 million into facade money, and that sounds like, oh, where'd you get $1 million? Well, that number is comprised of private investment from the building owner, the local share money, and then from our business improvement districts match. But all told, over $1 million has just gone into our facades on downtown. Because of that success of that program, we have softly launched what is being called locally as our Main Street Match. It is modeled after Detroit's Motor City Match, and as you can imagine, their funding is coming from places like the Ford Foundation and some really big companies, but the principle is the same. We now know that once we had a more vibrant and attractive Main Street, people started to look up. They started to look up and realize, what could we do up there? And that's where the expense comes in, because those second and third floors are just tremendously expensive to rehab. But as I tell everybody that expresses interest, you start with where do you start if you're going to rehab an old building? Anyone? I'm sorry? I think I heard it. The roof! The roof! You start with the roof. Please, 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 as Washington learned, the roof should never be on fire, nor should it hold water, nor should it hold water, which we
Nor
are...
should it not hold water.
Exactly. I'll just hang my head in shame on that one. So really and truly, our Main Street Match is meant to stabilize, and even if it is to mothball some of our more historically significant or attractive buildings, we are going to put our money where our mouth is. And now I am going to shout out to Donna in her former role with the National Road. Our partnership with the National Road 2 years ago, 1 year ago, I can't remember, during COVID, how about we just leave it at that, we did apply for and were approved for historic tax credits, which is sort of the money of doing historic reclamation and remediation in downtown. It was a long and technical process, and if we wouldn't have had Donna and her team from the state and the National Park Service, we never could have done it. So thank you, Donna.
One thing that's important to note is that a lot of you sitting in this room are not boroughs, but you're townships. And so you have a different kind of neighborhood. You don't have a main street per se, and some of this stuff doesn't equate for you. But even if you have one small little piece of a downtown shopping area, with COVID came a new understanding of what it means to buy local, right? To support the businesses that live and grow in your own neighborhood, because they're supporting you as well. We always want new money, but we want the regular money to keep circulating, right? It's important to keep our money circulating and add new money at the same time. So there are ways that you can use some of the programs through the Department of Community and Economic Development, DCED. There's some flexibility in some CDBG money sometimes. I know you guys have to worry about roads and potholes and snow removal, and there's a lot that falls on your plates on a daily basis. We're just asking that you look towards Blight as something that is going to help you increase your tax base so that you can then create a more dynamic neighborhood, and we can bring more people to live in your communities and in your region and in the Commonwealth. So I think that's it. Mr. Obardo.
I'm glad you brought up townships, because within our townships we have little communities. And at one time, they had storefronts, and some of them still do. And that is a business community in itself. And part of my question is, has anyone thought about changing their comprehensive plan to actually deal with blight? Or do they deal with blight in their comprehensive plan? And when some of these buildings are demolished and you want businesses to come in to rebuild, sometimes they have to go to zoning hearing boards, or they have to jump through hoops just to put a business back in. It would be much easier if we would deal with that and change some of the zoning requirements as well as our comp plans. And I don't know if you run into anything like that.
So Washington County does have a comprehensive plan. They had one as I came on board at about the same time that Eric came on board. We are in the process of re-upping. Yes, your community needs a comprehensive plan. It seems like a ton of work and a ton of money to get it done, but from those comprehensive plans comes the money. And I can't stress that enough. Every single grant from local share to Hillman, Benedum, RK, want to know on those applications for fundings, does your community, does your county have a comprehensive plan, and is the project you're working on referenced in the aforementioned plan? So yes, that is something that is not just an academic exercise, but it has implications when it comes to the dollars for sure. So I strongly encourage you to start that process if you haven't already. And I'm just going to try to save myself a little bit from Donna's wrath. She said that you all needed to leave here with one easy thing to do to help Blight in your communities. And I have been thinking about this since our first conversation. I'm like, what is really easy to do that will have immediate effect? When you send out a tax bill, delinquent or not, when you have to send out a code, notice of violation, or anything that has sort of you've screwed up kind of message in it, and that's okay to have that message, please, please, please take a half a day and compile a list of resources for that person who is getting that letter to be able to call someone. So many of these tax letters, code violation notes arrive on somebody's doorstep. They know something's wrong. They don't know how to fix it. And who can be on that list? Your high schools sometimes have like lawn services for people who are elderly. Your code enforcement brother-in-law might have a landscape company. Your faith-based organizations usually have sort of a helper squad. The community service groups, Rotary, Lions clubs. Now you have to call them first and make sure they want to be on the list. So you have to do a little bit of homework, but that is a zero cost way to let somebody know that they've got a situation and here are some people to help you. And I can't tell you what a difference that can make in a community, even if it's, you know, somebody's lawn is too high. Maybe their lawnmower broke and they can't get it fixed and they just need some help. Think about it from how do you fix the problem, just not where the problem is. So that's my
Good job, Christy.
Thank you. I just earned my lunch.
Read that already?
And back to what you mentioned, yes, Canonsburg does have a comprehensive plan, and we're actually up to redo it. But what we've done the last 2 years is really, starting COVID, the last 2 years, we've really forethought of our zoning and our ordinances to make sure that it's going to allow for redevelopment, right? Especially in our central business district, but it's going to allow for redevelopment. I'll give you a prime example, is one of our ordinances, if a house burnt down and down to the foundation, that you couldn't rebuild a house on that lot. So that was something that we had to change. It was like, that's crazy. So to your point, yes, we do have a comprehensive plan, and two, we've been working with council, solicitor, code enforcement officer, zoning officer, to make sure that we're thinking ahead, so it's not going to stifle those individuals that want to come into town and rehab a building or something like that. Yeah, thank you.
Can I just say one thing on that point or two? First of all, when you're interviewing firms to do your comp plan, you want to make sure that what you end up with is actionable. So in other words, the comp plan can list lots of different items of concern. You know, the comp plan covers them. I see George shaking her head. But it has to be actionable. So if they're giving you things on blight, you want to be able to say, here are some of the steps we can take, long-term and short-term activities, you know, what we call lighter, quicker, cheaper. You can make an effect on someone by showing them in a quick way, because people don't understand how long grants take and how long all of those other things take. They're going to see something. They're going to get involved, but you have to keep them engaged. So they have to see something going on in their neighborhood. So that's important. So it's when you select your comp plan offers, you want to make sure. And the other thing is you really want to understand your own code enforcement laws. You need to take a look at them and see what they say and what they mean. Because lots of times you don't know. You're elected officials, you have real jobs besides, or you're roadmasters and you're out there. But understanding how your community works and what guide the decisions that are made is important for the long-term success of how you move forward. And just on Christy's list, don't forget about Boy Scouts, 4-H, all those kinds of people, local schools, high schools, they have to do community service. So there's lots of different places to go, talk to guidance counselors at high schools. And again, you're creating ownership for the next generation.
And I just want to, really quick, because there's questions, you would be surprised if you do a couple of projects in a neighborhood, who comes out to see what you're doing and to offer assistance. I would say after our first year, we had 4 contractors offer services either free or greatly reduced rates because this is where they live and they have electrical, plumbing, contracting type skills. This goes back to my opening statement about blight being personal. Somebody, Mr. Smith, 6 blocks down, is not going to go over to Mrs. Jones's house and say, well, I see your roof and gutters are falling apart. I'll fix it for you. That doesn't happen. But if you can be the conduit to open those conversations, I promise you, this is Western Pennsylvania. I have lived 8 other places in my 50+ years. There is no place like it. Mr. Rogers was right. We are surrounded by the helpers. You have to look for the helpers. So think about that. They go on your list. We have 3 contractors on our code helper list, and I don't think any of them have ever sent a bill.
Yes.
Okay, wait, got a whole bunch.
Good.
I pointed that way, so I apologize, but I'll point this way next.
I just wanted to mention the city of Erie completed their comprehensive plan in 2016, and it's completely based on a property condition survey. So its foundation is how to address blight in every part of the city, and that's our comprehensive plan. So if you want a good example of how you could do that, there's starting points in every neighborhood because every neighborhood is a little different. So if you have really highly distressed neighborhoods with lots of blight and lots of disinvestment, the action and everything's actionable. The starting point is very different than a nicer neighborhood that just has a few signs of disinvestment. So I would recommend anyone who wants to see a comprehensive plan that's completely based on blight and disinvestment to check out the city of Erie.
And tell us your name.
Kathy Rosnick, I'll be.
And Kathy's going to be doing a session, a concurrent session.
But it is online and it is a really well done plan. And it's completely data driven.
Who did your plan?
CZB LLC out of Alexandria, Virginia. They're based out of Alexandria. They've done a few other plans in Erie County, but they work across the United States. And they use the same model. They base it on housing assessment and investment neighborhoods.
Great, thanks for the information. Okay.
We are actually a trail town.
Yay!
And the trail is on one side of the bridge, and people come across, and our main street is full. We have one building that is just damaged, and a block up, we have a building that has been there for 100 years. It takes up half that block, and it also is blight. I have worked alley on that, and
part of our business.
So what municipality are you? West Newton or West Newton? So you say they're a trail town, so they're along the Great Allegheny Passage.
Yes, and we're working very hard to try to do this. The problem is, if these buildings have to be torn down, our main street is a floodplain. So now we have a whole number of issues, because now they have to be rebuilt up to code, which would make our main street look horrible. So we are trying our best to save these buildings, but they're tied up. The one that's a Apple Law has been bankruptcy, foreclosure, back taxes, and now it still has 2 line mortgages on it, but nobody's paying it. And so, because they're part of our business,
Right.
So it's the center of our town, our community, we can't afford to lose that building.
Right.
And then we need to be able to get out of the red tape so that something can be done. Because other people want to invest in it, but we can't. No one can get their hands on it. So we're in a very tough situation right now. So if anybody can help us with that, we really great.
So West Newton's asking for help.
So
My advice.
Say that again?
My advice would be to talk to Carnegie. So Carnegie in Allegheny County emerged from a flood that exceeded everybody's expectations. Similarly situated buildings, completely wiped out, obviously a floodplain. They had sort of a missing teeth approach to their downtown for 7 to 8 years, but they have come up with some solutions. And the reason I'm giving a shout out, even though I'm sure there's other advice in the room, that's advice for everybody. As much as I like to think my job is so hard and Eric's job is so hard and everybody's community is unique, the really good thing is nothing is new. Blight is not new. Floods are not new. Missed mortgage payments, all of this stuff, somebody has gone before you. And I absolutely say to yourself, who can I talk to? There's not a person in this room, there's not a person in the area that doesn't like to feel like they know something and want to share it with somebody else. So I strongly encourage you to talk to Carnegie, and that literally ends my advice on the subject.
And that's what today is supposed to be about. You're in a room with people who have had different experiences at different times, different challenges, different opportunities, and so connecting with everyone today and in the future and coming together again and having conversations is how we're all going to lift each other up, right? And make things happen and help people understand it's not don't do this, it's please do it this way. And here are the reasons. There was a young lady in the back that had her hand up.
I was just going to ask if y'all had a point in time where you realized you needed to get more information out there. You went through like a revamp of how you were presenting your website, making things like your zoning ordinance accessible and searchable online with GIS. Just kind of help spur development. I think a lot of places have an access issue, so I was wondering how you implement that.
I'll speak. We're actually going through that right now. So we just launched our new website, and there's still kinks through that process. So for us, it was we're learning through the process of we didn't communicate it correctly. So now we got to go back and make sure that we're communicating it out to the members of our community. So right now, that's what we're doing. We launched it, but we failed to communicate, and now we're just backtracking a little bit, but that's what we're going through right now, is how to communicate that. And the idea really behind it is, my mind goes to, as I was driving around last week, we're going to do a community-wide cleanup. But that community-wide cleanup is going to encompass, cleaning up everything so we can enhance our code enforcement, but it also gives us opportunity to communicate a year in review, if you will, almost like a newsletter, if you will. So it gives us the opportunity, and we'll do that annually, but we're still looking for a platform of how to communicate, whether it's text messages to community members, stuff like that. So if anybody knows how to communicate efficiently and effectively, then I'll talk to Donna.
There's no overarching way to communicate, but I suggest that you start talking to your churches and use their church bulletins. We make an assumption that everyone has an electronic device that they can go to and find out everything there is. But there are still people with flip phones, there are people with no computers, there's a generation of people that don't find themselves in tune with some kind of media. And so go to the places, the schools, your churches. It's a way to get a message out in a different manner that you can reach people. Senior living facilities, any place like that touches people who may not touch an electronic device.
And I just really also want to make a plug, as we all became aware of at a heightened level during COVID, is our internet access. All the things that some of us take for granted, every single day. There are pockets of the city of Washington that do not have reliable broadband access points, just to give credit to Donna's suggestions, but also to sort of advocate for your communities in that arena as well.
So we have about 7 minutes left, sir.
Speed round. Yay!
Let's try to get some other.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Not to discount you, but I know they.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mary Perez, Penn Township. You had mentioned using interns or neighbors to help with your blight inventory. When you're asking them to do that, how did you define blight to them so that they knew exactly what they were to report, as opposed to just your, I don't want to say simple, but your property maintenance concerns and your high grass concerns? Or did you take all of that and then sort it once you got it back to your staff level?
Can you over here hear the question? Can you
Oh
hear
my
the
God, I feel like Joy planted this question in the audience. So blight is different for everybody. For my husband, blight is the backyard neighbor's leaning chain link fence. He's obsessed, I'm not kidding. I'm like, honey, you know what I do for a living, right? I'm not calling code enforcement on a leaning chain link fence. We're still in discussions about that. My first year, I borrowed Wilkinsburg's blight language and questions. And that's what I inputted into our things. And then I met Joy. And she brought Steel Rivers COG to help me out here.
Pennsylvania Housing Alliance, and we created a blight training because not everybody understands blight. And to your point, it's personal. Everybody has a different message. It's very important to train your data collectors.
And she has now all these fancy slides and examples, and basically has done the work for us all.
But based on a lot of who comes before, so Pennsylvania Housing Alliance, our COGS, we've got a lot of COGS here. I mean, the data collection has to be done in a way to protect you as a municipality. And so yeah.
So see Joy.
See Joy.
Asterisk. See
Yes.
Joy.
And next year Joy will be
or your COGS, the COGS are here. They're your real community-based resource goals.
There was another question back here? No?
I was trying to get her attention.
Okay.
Sorry.
The gentleman over here. Go ahead, sir.
Part of blight is when you have a fire in your municipality and the individual doesn't want to use their insurance money to do anything about it. But there is a way that I guess it's a state law, that if you have it in your code, you have a code regarding fire, that there's an escrow that you're allowed to get from the insurance company and hold. It worked in my town because I had an individual wanted to spend the money on an RV and left the property just sit. So he came in for the remainder of the money that I had in escrow. I said, you're not getting it until you do something with the property. Well, I was the bad guy. He came to the council meeting screaming, hollering, I'm the bully. I said, well, the law's the law, and I'm not allowing you to get your money. You'll get it when you do something with the property. So there are other avenues too. I mean, blight, fire properties are blight. People do walk away from it. They'll take their insurance money and say, well, I don't care. They leave town. So that's a thing that you should check your ordinances, make sure that you have something in there that allows you to receive the escrow and hold.
Yeah, that's what we do in Canonsburg. Any house that catches on fire, we work with the insurance company, but that money does go in escrow, and we make sure that they're going to do something with that property before we do anything releasing those funds. So yes, yep, good comment.
Yes, ma'am.
Did you make your blight inventories public facing, so were residents able to see blight in your community, or was it private?
Our data is private, and this is a little bit of my own personal soapbox. So much of our blight in Washington is still inhabited. If you want to know where the vacant or abandoned properties are, I'm happy to share that with you, but I am not comfortable for somebody's dad to know that Johnny's house is, blighted, and that happens in a small town. I'm very, I protect, because, let me back up. We build relations with the houses that we end up going into rehab. We're there for a couple of weeks. We get to know these families. We understand their situation. It's very personal for the CDC in Washington. So I would never want somebody, obviously lots of neighbors know that work is being done, but I really would never want somebody's house to end up on a screen at a conference as an example of blight. That is not something that I personally would be comfortable with.
Yeah, and that's the same thing. Right now, we're our list is private. It's the same thing. We work closely with those property owners, and sometimes we can't. Quite frankly, we can't even find them where they're deceased, and we've reached out to family members, and they don't want anything to do with the property. So we try to deal with that in-house, and even any property that becomes a nuisance, we still try to handle that in-house versus blasting someone, because what we've been seeing is there's a pattern with certain ones that we've actually pulled in, and quite frankly told them, like, look, here's what, it's almost like an ultimatum, right? But here's what you have to do. Here's where you have to bring your properties to compliance. You have X amount to do it. If not, then we're going to continue to fine you. But at the end of the day, it's so to answer your question, they're private.
Okay. Any other burning question? We have 4 minutes, so I thank you all for your attention. Please give the panel all around.